Good morning, and thank you very much to all of you for joining with us today. My name is Nishi from the TGA Learn team at TGA, and I would like to start today's webinar off with an acknowledgement to country. We acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as traditional custodians of the ACT and recognize any other people or families with connection to the lands of the ACT and region. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. Now, without further ado, I will hand over this session to our presenter today, Gary Pascoe. Over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Nishi. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for joining us today. So this is the 18th webinar of the TGA's UDI project, and we're really looking to use this opportunity to use it as a bit of a snapshot and a sort of a milestone, some checkpoint to where the project is at and where we're likely to go. I know we have a number of questions prior to the webinar, which will fit nicely into where we're going, what's happening, and what's the process, as well as then some confirmation around particular decisions that have been made around the UDI policy or proposed policy direction. So we thought we'd use this opportunity as a bit of a checkpoint, give you an update on that, and then also call for some support or interest from those sponsors who would be interested in participating, or anybody else from a interested in more understanding of UDI to sort of reach out and contact us. Today you'll hear from me. I'm the UDI project lead for the TGA, and many of you would have met me or worked with me in the past. You'll also hear from Jasmine Hyatt. So Jasmine is the manager of our UDI support team. So you'll hear through the course of the presentation to use the UDI@health.gov.au mailbox, and essentially Jasmine and her team provide support around that. So Jasmine will talk to you about a number of aspects around how you can get involved. So we really wanted to focus the session, really try and split today's session up into two parts. The first one is really the first three elements, which is give you an update on what we know so far, where we have landed, some of the things that we are considering in terms of the finalisation of the recommendations or information that the government will then start to look at, to consider and make recommendations or advice to us around the implementation of UDI. So that will really then what we're looking to do over the next 6 months. So give you an update over the coming months around our plan and timeframes, etc. And then have Jasmine talk to you a bit about how we can continue to get your involvement and seek your involvement, because it is really important for us to continue to have that collaborative working arrangements with a lot of stakeholders and with sponsors and others within the healthcare industry to be able to get feedback and ensure that the UDI implementation is going to be as straightforward and seamless as possible. And then at the end of the session, we have some frequently asked questions. We have a number of questions, so we'll aim to keep a large proportion of time available for your questions. So as Nishi had mentioned, if you do have questions, you would like them covered through the course of the session and they don't get addressed by me or Jasmine as we're speaking, feel free to put that in the Slido, and Jasmine will facilitate a question and answer session as well, so that we can ensure that we can cover as many questions we have left as possible. So just moving on to what we do know so far. So essentially where we have landed with the medical devices and the scope of the UDI within here in Australia. So a number of you may have seen this and may have heard some of this material through some of the sponsor workshops that we ran in June. But really as a group wanted to give everybody an update on what those key elements are. And so certainly we have pretty well landed, and certainly had the Minister provided guidance to us in April around the scope of the UDIs within here in Australia. So we're looking to actually include the UDI requirements within the essential principles within the medical device regulations here in Australia. And then looking to maybe there's other elements that we need to include within the regulations to ensure around the submission of data into the UDI database. But certainly the scope of the devices for UDI is likely to apply to, and what we're expecting to apply to all medical devices, Class 3, Class 2A, 2B, and Class 1 supplied sterile devices. So UDI will be looking for and will be calling for all those devices supplied in Australia that to either meet that classification, and for in vitro diagnostic devices, it'll be Class 4, Class 3, Class 2, and then Class 1 devices that categorized as instrument analyzers or software products within the IVD space. So we have some clarity around that, and obviously then looking at those devices that fit within those classifications is looking to where where UDI requirements will apply. For those devices that aren't required to be on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, they will be exempt. They won't require a UDI to be supplied. Now, sponsors can supply the UDI onto those devices, either whether they're exempt or whether they don't fit within that classifications that I just listed before. So, so sponsors are entitled or are okay to supply that. So the TGA won't be limiting your provision of the information to the TGA or to inclusion of UDI compliant on your devices, but essentially it'll be mandatory for those device classes that I've just listed. We've also sort of settled on some positions around the issuing agencies. So I know we had some questions from participants around will we be able to use UDI's device identifiers that are used in the Europe or US, and certainly the answer is yes. We will be finalising. We have officially sort of announcing that issuing agencies from GS1 Australia or GS1 HIBIC, HIBCC, the Health Industry Business Communications Council. So there will be the second issuing agency, and then the International Blood Products Issuing Agency, ICBAR, that's being used by other jurisdictions. So Australia will settle on those three issuing agencies as our issuing agencies for UDI devices here in Australia. And the aim for that is to ensure that we have some flowing of products from Europe or US, and that those manufacturers or sponsors who are getting devices from those jurisdictions to look to have those UDI DIs or the labels that are used in these jurisdictions as simply flow into the Australian market as well. And really looking to encourage that to happen. So if you are interested in information about the issuing agencies, we encourage you to start talking to either email us at the UDI Help Desk or make contact with those issuing agencies that you may have a relationship with, and actually talk to them about those devices. So we will support again devices coming into Australia with UDI DIs that have been issued for other jurisdictions. And for those organisations who are manufacturing here in Australia and supplying the products here in Australia, then we would encourage you to start talking to one of those organisations around how you can use their systems to be able to allocate you a UDI DI for your Australian supplied devices. For those manufacturers in Australia or Australian-based manufacturers who are supplying to other jurisdictions, those devices will not be required to carry UDI by the TGA. However, we note that if you are exporting to one of the other jurisdictions, there's a very high likelihood that those jurisdictions, Europe and US in particular, will require your devices to carry that. But that's obviously up to you to determine from a regulatory perspective around what that's required. But certainly devices that are manufactured in Australia and supplied in Australia will also be looking to carry UDI DI. The sort of final element is that we have settled on a number of data supplier methods. So as many of you probably know, as part of the UDI system that we're implementing, so the requirement will be to have labels on your devices and all higher levels of packaging for those devices that are UDI compliant. As I mentioned earlier, there will be supporting those devices that, or those labels that are used in other jurisdictions, provided they're compliant with the Australian, the other broader Australian regulatory requirements, to be able to sort of take those labels, all the carriers, barcodes, etc., that are used in other jurisdictions. We also then have a requirement, or sponsors of those devices that fit within that category will be required to supply the data for those devices to the Australian UDI database. And we've created 4 methods for sponsors to be able to do that, either through an online system through the Australian UDI database that you can enter those records one at a time. You could also using the online system upload a spreadsheet of entries within the UDI database. At the moment, it currently allows for 100 records. We have worked with some sponsors, with sponsors requesting us to increase the number, and we're working with them to sort of get a feel for what the optimal number is at maximum at the moment is around 400 or 500 records, but ensuring that it doesn't create either usability issues or systems issues. But we are looking to allow that a single spreadsheet to have 100+ records that then can be uploaded into the UDI database. The third method is then electronic data submission through the machine-to-machine method, which is a HL7 SPL format that's used in the US FDA. So we're in the process, and we'll talk a little bit later about what we're doing in that regard. And then the fourth one is then using the National Product Catalogue, which is maintained and managed through GS1 Australia. So those sponsors or organisations who are using GS1 to submit data through the National Product Catalogue, you have the option to use that as a method for submitting data into the UDI database as well. And that will be both for creating and amending records as required. So essentially we have settled on that method, and we're in the process of finalising all of those material and also allowing sponsors to test and get themselves ready. And so finally, as part of that, so data supply methods, we have defined the UDI data dictionary and all the required data elements. There is some work that we're doing around, I'll talk in a moment around some of the questions around whether what data elements are optional or mandatory. Essentially, the full set of data elements are known and currently in the version of the data dictionary. So we will be quite confident that we have a sort of full set of all the materials required. And really what we're doing next is then to take that information and start to finalise the regulatory requirements for doing that. As part of that process for finalising the regulatory requirements, we do have those 6 areas that we have had some feedback from sponsors, or we are looking into as part of the finalisation process. And these 6 areas I'll talk through in a moment have really elements have come back through our consultation and engagement with sponsors over the last couple of months. Since we had some workshops with sponsors in June, and then finalising a key elements around what those decisions are, and then putting that to sponsors before we're forming the we're providing advice or providing input into the government's consideration of the final UDI policy. So those sort of key elements are really around the first one, which is the timing of the UDI implementation. So one of the key areas that sponsors have provided feedback to is the timing of the UDI implementation in Australia and how it may fall within the window of implementation of UDI in Europe in particular. And with Europe and the timeframes that European are currently setting around the implementation of UDI, it creates a window where Europeans are expecting manufacturers to submit data to the European database or EUDAMED between Q2 2024 and then Q2 2026. And sponsors have highlighted some concerns around the timing and the types of data that that Australia may be calling for at the same time. So we actually have looked at a number of options and provided some considerations around how we could deal with that in relation to minimising the impact on sponsors and the data submission, and also finding a balance with getting the UDI requirements in place. So we're actually finalising that considerations, and we'll be releasing that to sponsors in coming weeks to then get their feedback. The second point, which is in clarifying the UDI requirements for retail-only devices. So one of the questions we had, or a number of questions we had through sponsors around the unique characteristics of UDI or devices that are sold solely and exclusively for retail, and whether some of the requirements for the full UDI to be on the device would be required. So we've gone back, referred to some of the processes that are being done internationally, as well as the International Medical Device Regulators guidance, and actually formulating a view around what are those requirements for UDI for retail-only devices. And again, we'll be issuing that as part of the material that we'll be submitting. We'll send out to sponsors in coming weeks. And looking to certainly have some consultation with retail organisations as well to understand the impact and implications of that on them as well. So we've had good feedback and just collating all of that together. The third point is then amending the implementation timeframe. So those of you who may have participated in our workshops may recall that we were grouping the implementation requirements for in vitro diagnostic devices, class 4, class 3, and class 2 together. And then 12 months later, then looking to have the data submitted and the mandatory compliance for Class 1 in vitro diagnostics to follow. Feedback from sponsors at the time was saying that the volume of Class 2 devices and the large number of Class 2 devices occurring at the same time as Class 4 and Class 3 was going to create a large impost on sponsors in terms of getting their data ready and be able to ensure their devices are compliant. So we're actually separating that time frame now and grouping Class 4 and Class 3 together, and then having Class 2 and Class 1 sort of come together as part of our timing and our proposed phasing that we'll be releasing. So we have looked at that device and sort of agree that our analysis has identified there's quite a volume of devices if we were going to group Class 4, 3 and 2 IVDs together. The fourth point is sort of key considerations, and one that we've had lengthy consultation and consideration over the last few weeks, which is around the rules for managing changes to UDI data. In Australia, we have a unique situation which is quite different to other sort of global jurisdictions or with the implementation of UDI, and that is the presence of the sponsor. And in Australia, the sponsor is the entity, as you know, responsible for the supply of the device and anything associated with the correct compliance within the Australian medical device regulations, which is great. And however, in other jurisdictions, it's the manufacturer that submits the UDI data, and so obviously that the relationship between the sponsor and the manufacturer is important to ensure that we have the correct data from the manufacturer and then presented by the sponsor. But then it gets more complicated when we start to have a single device which may have multiple sponsors here in Australia. So and then what are the rules, or what's the approach for managing those changes? And we've shaped the proposition, and we've sort of shaped the view of how that could work. And again, looking to socialise that with sponsors through the RegTech forum to ensure that we have got that right and that proposition will work. So that's certainly an area that has required quite a bit of consideration, and want to thank everybody who has provided your input into that already. The fifth element is, as many of you may know and have seen through some of the UDI material that's been published to date, the Australian requirements are looking to not require UDI for surgical loan kits or system of procedure for PACS. We certainly will require UDI on those devices that sit within or individually packaged or provided within the surgical loan kit or the system of procedure pack, and that will be required. But for the actual kit itself, we won't be looking to for the supply of a UDI. However, the sort of key question is then coming. So how do we identify, or how do sponsors and certainly those in healthcare identify those devices, and what materials be used to be able to identify those devices in those kits, so it's easy at point of care to be able to then understand those. So there's some work we're doing around just providing guidance and getting information, and then really starting to be able to provide guidance to sponsors and manufacturers around how that could work. And essentially, not so much a regulatory point of view, but certainly looking at what guidance we prepare to ensure that we can give some clarity around that. And the last point is certainly some considerations, a little bit of work we've done. We had some representation from sponsors in other countries, because as I mentioned earlier, we were certainly looking to support labels and labelling from jurisdictions in Europe and US, and then be able to allow that to sort of flow through. So we had representation from sponsors who were importing products from other jurisdictions, and particularly Japan, and looking to get guidance around whether that would be something that we could support. So we had some consultation with the sort of Japanese, as well as looked at and spoken to sponsors who actually representing or importing products from those jurisdictions, and looking at giving us a way forward in terms of how we represent that. But at this stage, it's looking like there's most of those jurisdictions aligning with the European or the US sort of markets, and there's no specific requirements or anything unique that we need to consider for accepting labelling for those other countries. Again, that will all be wrapped up and sort of put out and released as part of some material that the TGA team and the UDI team will be sharing with through our RegTech forum in the coming weeks. So That's sort of really where we know what we've done and where we're going. So from a next plan perspective, or what we're likely to do in the coming months, I really wanted to share this with you to sort of give a bit of an outline what our timeframe's looking. So as many of you are probably thinking, and certainly some questions that have been recently asked, with all of these activities happening, our goal of having the UDI regulations in place by the end of 2023 is really sort of starting to be under threat. And so what we've done is we've mapped that out and looking from the time frame. So really finalising these consultations, as well as the workload that the regulatory drafting team, and certainly there's a number of government initiatives that are in place that that are happening in relation to changes for government regulations just outside of the health and the TGA space, but also within other areas within government. All come to the same regulatory drafting team, and their guidance to us is there's a significant amount of workload, and so until the sort of second quarter of this year, they won't be in a position to finalise in regulatory drafting. So to give you some clarity, what we're looking to do is provide sort of these high-level milestones and dates. So over the coming weeks, as I mentioned, we will be looking to finalise that consultation on those areas that I've just spoken to, and providing some information to sponsors and getting your feedback. That will then feed into the finalisation and the preparation of the regulatory drafting and the pack of materials that will go to our regulatory team that will then start to finalise the regulatory drafting. That will obviously have to be taken to government, and the government will provide their guidance and direction on where they would like that to the UDI rules and UDI implementation to land. And so that will happen in Q4 2023, so at the back end of this year, with the really then sort of looking to aim to have the finalisation of the regulations in the first quarter of 2024. And at that point in time, looking sort of once the regulations are finalised, we really have the ability to sort of tick our final hurdle and jump our final hurdle in relation to having the regulations in effect. The UDI database ready and ready to go, and having sponsors who are also being brought along as part of that process. So we're aiming to have voluntary compliance take effect from in the second quarter of 2024. Now, the time frames in terms of mandatory compliance and what happens after that, we'll be issuing as part of the sort of broader consultation on those remaining policy areas. But certainly that's where we're looking to sort of aim, and so have the UDI take effect from Q2 2024. However, we're not still standing still while we're finalising all that. And certainly, if I move back to the left-hand side, we do have quite a number of activities with sponsors and other interested stakeholders participating in feedback on the UDI database or some of these sort of key areas. And so we have a pre-production version of the UDI database running today. It has been running for some time, and using that as a process or using it as a tool to help sponsors provide us with some feedback on the rules, regulations, data rules, etc. And that is going to continue. So we have released recently, or some time ago now, a version of the UDI database that will include electronic patient information, so patient information leaflets, or there's sort of other supporting documents that can be attached with the UDI database, and we have called for sponsor input and testing of that. So we're looking to sort of get over the next quarter or the remaining weeks is really to get sponsor feedback on the implementation of that patient information leaflets. But also at the same time, we're currently in the process of testing our national product catalogue data submission, and we'll be calling for interest from sponsors on those of you interested in testing and finalising the machine-to-machine interface. So as I mentioned, we have the data dictionary in the process of being finalised, and we're pretty comfortable, very comfortable with the data elements. We're looking now we have implemented an API and the ability for sponsors to electronically submit data to us, and we're looking for those sponsors who would be interested in starting to consider that as an implementation method. In addition, over the coming weeks, you will see an update to the UDI Hub on the TGA website. We are looking, we note that it has gotten a little bit out of date and certainly not reflecting a number of the things that I've spoken to you today. So we're in the process of refreshing that. In coming weeks, you'll see an update of the TGA website or the UDI Hub on the website properties. and we'll be looking to use that to ensure that we have accurate and more current information as the process is starting to go. We are, as we're sort of getting closer and closer to finalisation of those key areas, we are getting more and more confident around those particular dates, and it is something that we are now starting to bring together and coalesce around, ensuring that the database, the regulations, and all of the information supporting products all come together to ensure that sponsors or any other stakeholders who are interested in knowing about UDI have the information that's relevant to them. In the last quarter of 2022-24, as I meant 23, sorry, as I mentioned, we will be finalising the regulatory drafting, getting the government considerations, and ensuring that that the government we're clear from what government's requirements are around the UDI implementation, and then that will reflect into the regulations. We'll continue the machine-to-machine and MPC testing. So between now and Christmas, we are very interested in those sponsors who would be willing to participate in some of that testing, and in growing that numbers. And you will see requests from the UDI support team in coming weeks around getting involvement in that. In the first quarter of 2024, we have finalised all the technical materials. We'll have the database ready and packaged, all the support documentation released, with the view to having sponsors ready, being prepared, so that we can go live for voluntary compliance in that second quarter of 2024. So that's where we're sort of looking at our sort of current deadline and timeframes. We will continue to work through that, and as and if they change, we'll certainly be notifying this group or others through the TGA website and through other forums. But as I mentioned, it is something that we are subject to sort of government direction and government approvals. We're certainly looking more and more around ensuring that these are the dates we're working pretty closely towards. So hopefully that has answered a key number of the questions that you have. I will very gladly take some more questions on anything specific as we get to the question and answer session. But before we do that, I might hand over to Jasmine to have a bit of a talk about what you can do in terms of involvement.
Great, thanks so much, Gary. And we do have a lot of great questions coming through, just so you know, on the Slido app. So just to recap, Gary's covered a lot of this, but just wanted to recap how you can get involved. So currently we are working on the AusUDID pre-production environment. So that's available now as we speak for sponsors and manufacturers of medical devices. So those users can test the functionality and the current available data upload methods. We also have a UDI technical working group, so the TWG. So that's for data providers. So that covers sponsors, manufacturers, and third-party data providers. And you can attend, if you're one of those three, you can attend the UDI technical working group. So they're held around twice a month and cover topics such as grace periods, upload functionality, trigger fields. So when a change to UDI records might trigger in a new UDI. And other technical aspects of AusUDID. So if you're interested, if you're a sponsor, manufacturer, or third-party data provider, and you're interested in attending, please send an email to us. You can also visit the UDI Hub, as Gary mentioned. We currently have webinars, previous consultations, news and updates on there. And we will be refreshing all of our content and information over the coming weeks. So keep an eye on the UDI Hub. We'll probably also send some emails out to our stakeholders, letting you know that that's available, but you can always check in at any time on that. What can you do as a sponsor or manufacturer to get involved right now? Well, as I've mentioned, you can email us if you want access to AusUDID, if you want to join the technical working group. So if you do want access to the pre-production environment of AusUDID, you can test out how it looks and feels and give us some feedback on your experience on that. Feedback is very important to us, and it has been throughout this entire process. Helps us make sure that our products are usable, are user-friendly, and that they're doing what they're supposed to do. Gary mentioned you can also test the PILS functionality, so patient information leaflets, so that's a current feature. And we currently have the 2 out of 4 data supply methods. So that's currently the online and online bulk methods. So I know there's some questions about that in the Q&A, which we'll address shortly. And MPC, we are finalising that testing, and that's about to go live. So if you are interested in using the MPC method, you can send us an email, and when that's available to you, we can add you to the list to test that functionality. And M2M will be the last of those 4 data upload methods. As Gary also mentioned, if you're a sponsor of manufacturer who's not yet working with one of our accredited issuing agencies, you might want to start considering which issuing agency to utilise. So as mentioned, that's GS1, HIBCC and ICCBA. And they're the 3 that TGA will be working with at the moment to start with. So feel free as well to email us at any time, udi@health.gov.au, if you have any questions on any of the material we've covered so far. And that's it from me on that. Over to you, Gary.
Thanks, Jasmine. So from a schedule perspective, and our plan for the agenda today was really then to start getting into some of the questions that have been asked to date. So there are a number of questions that we have been asked, so I might sort of touch on those and answer those, but use that as an opportunity for you to, if there is anything that has been, that is sort of top of mind, you would like to ask, feel free to use the Slido app to raise it. Again, if you see a question that you like, feel free to upvote that. We will work through those, Jasmine and I will work through those questions, obviously from the ones that are most popular through, and time permitting, hopefully we'll get through them all. If not, we will we'll look to address them. But certainly our 4 sort of key 4 questions, I think we may have covered a lot of this already. So the first one was, when will the UDI regulatory framework be finalised? And as I mentioned, we are looking for that to be completed, and the regulatory drafting subject to government approval and the sort of government direction on that, really to start taking effect from next quarter, and then really for sort of either the back end of this year, more likely in the Q1 2024, for the regulations to be finalised, to take effect, and then we'll notify that for the UDI voluntary compliance period to actually commence. So we are working through a number of those sort of key questions that I've highlighted before. So there is some work that we're doing, and value your input into that. But it is the number of things that we're looking to finalise is diminishing, and we're getting quite comfortable with some of the elements that we are landing on. Again, subject to taking that to government and having their approval or their consideration and recommendation on that. Mandatory compliance, when will that take effect? And again, as I mentioned, that our current sort of plans are to have that voluntary compliance period open for some time. And as part of the sort of finalisation of what our timeframes and recommended timeframes for government will be informed. So as part of that sort of key considerations and the implications of the European UDI rollout and the implementation of UDI within Europe, and the implications of providing data to Eudamed is something we've considered, and we'll provide some more information to sponsors around that. How do you get a UDI? I think we've sort of covered that really for those who are interested in a new UDI, that if you don't supply goods or import goods from US or Europe that meet the UDI requirements, then talk to one of those 3 issuing agencies that both Jasmine and I reflected. We will be, as one of the updates to the TGA website and the UDI hub, we'll be providing more information about those 3 issuing agencies as part of that update. So that information will be on the hub. And then the final question, when will the Aussie UDID production be released? It will continue in our pre-production form until the regulations take effect. And per my previous comments, that is looking to be around a sort of second quarter, end of first quarter 2024. So we'll continue to have the UDI pre-production version and the test version of the UDI database running until that takes live. And so as it's finalised and as our regulations and our sort of final elements position to finalise, we'll be updating that pre-production version to ensure that it is a mirror of what that final version of production will be. So if you haven't already registered your interest in the UDI pre-production, Aussie UDI pre-production, feel free to contact the support team, and that will give you some visibility and at least an understanding of what the capabilities are and how you use the system. So thank you. I think that's, there is a couple of other questions that came through on the pre-webinar from the prior to the webinar. Is there an update machine to machine? I feel I've sort of, machine to machine is something that we have finalized. We actually are releasing a version or an update to the capabilities of machine to machine into our pre-production environment at the end of this month, or actually by the 29th of September. We're looking to have a version of the machine to machine capabilities in place. And then we'll open it up to a small group of sponsors. The manufacturers are looking to use it to ensure that we do some testing with that small group. If you are interested in participating in that, please let us know at the UDI Help Desk. We will be providing information on not just the data model, the data specifications, the HL7 standard, but also aspects for how to get into the API, how to use the API and get keys to get access, etc. So that's very much a very technical conversation. So feel free to bring your technical teams to be participating in that conversation, but we invite you to register your interest with the support team. And once we have some testing, and then we'll open that machine-to-machine interface up to sort of greater numbers. But we recognise that sponsors as a major investment in machine-to-machine, so we want to try and get that out as early as possible and ensure that it's correct before we start and stable before we start. Sponsors are spending too much time and effort to ensure they can accommodate it. The second question, what details need to be included on the labelling to meet Australian requirements? So essentially that's sort of a number of things associated with that. From a UDI point of view, we will essentially, there may be some distinctions between different types of devices, but if I make a sort of broad and general statement coming back to us, there'll be a requirement for a human readable form, so the UDI, DI, and then the production information that is associated with the full UDI to be both in a human readable form as well as machine readable form on the label. The particular symbology that we are looking for is the TGA is not mandating or requiring any specific symbology. So we're looking for manufacturers and sponsors to be able to determine what's the right, whether it's a barcode, whether it's a QR code, a data matrix, or some other method in terms of being able to encode in a machine readable form the UDI information. We're relying on manufacturers and sponsors to work out what's most suitable for their particular market. There are some requirements if you are using RFID tags to be able to ensure that there's also a human readable form on the label itself. And then but there are some certainly we're not really specifying whether you use a particular type of 1D, 2D data matrix code. So there will be some more information on the update to the hub around that requirement. Third question, will the United States FDA, European Commission compliant UDIs be accepted in Australia? Yes, is the short answer. Now, obviously, if you're going to be supplying devices with those UDIs on them, then we'll be requiring you to submit that data into the Australian UDI database as well. So any devices that are supplied in Australia that are coming from those jurisdictions, we will need the UDI, DI, or the UDI information in the database. And when can sponsors test the AusUDI pre-production? Now, we're very open and very interested in getting sponsors' feedback, both in terms of the helping you understand some of the rules and some of the requirements of UDI, but also on the usability. We're very interested in getting your responses on usability of the database. Is there anything that doesn't make sense or is not intuitive from your perspective? And we would be really welcoming feedback and ongoing feedback from that perspective. So if you haven't had access or haven't been granted access as a sponsor to the UDI database, and we are limiting access at the moment to sponsors to ensure that we have data in and we can use data and the data is valid before we start to open it up to other stakeholders. But if you are a sponsor and you are interested, then please get in touch with the UDI Help Desk, udi@health.gov.au. So I think that's all of the sort of the pre-submitted questions. We might just pause for a moment. I think I'll hand back to Nishi and just have a moment. Just encourage you to raise the questions of Slido, and we'll spend the next sort of 15 or so minutes responding to those questions.
All All right, Gary, do we want to start to take some questions? So we've got a lot of questions here today. We will do our best to answer as many as possible. If you feel like you don't get the answer fully explained to you, or if there's something else you'd like to ask, please email us udi@health.gov.au, and my support team will get back to you as soon as possible. So first question, Gary, this one's been upvoted quite a few times, and you have touched upon it a little. When is the TGA planning to publish UDI regulation and implementation timeline?
Thanks, Jasmine. So it's probably published in two parts. So that's a broad time frame that I sort of just outlined and had in these slides. Obviously, we'll publish as part of this webinar. We'll look to put that onto the UDI Hub as well. However, until we have sort of government advice and direction in terms of timeframes and specific timeframes, we won't be able to sort of publish that. So if I go back to sort of the previous slide around timeframes, we're looking for that to happen to take effect with get the government to have their considerations, their recommendations in the last quarter of this year. And then once we have that more certainty, and obviously from a government's point of view, what they're looking to do in terms of considerations and timing, then we'll publish more definitive timeframes and dates as part of that. But sort of we're working within that broad parameters and that I've sort of published and talked through before. And once we know more, we can put that in place. But we certainly will be looking for providing more clarity as part of the updates to the TGA Hub.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question, can you please repeat the device categories that will be mandated to have UDI?
Sure, I certainly can. And again, it is an update. So the update to the UDI Hub will contain this information as well. So like I mentioned, we're in the process of finalising that and we'll have it out. And the reason it's all new information because it is something that we've had government direction on in terms of scope. But just to answer your question, so medical devices, class 3. So I'll take a first step back. So if the device is required to be registered on the ARTG, then, and it is a class 3 medical device, a class 2B, class 2A, or a class 1 supplied sterile, then as a broad statement, there may be some exceptions in different characteristics and different device types, but they'll be expected and required to have a UDI and meet the UDI requirements. For in vitro diagnostics, so IVD class 4, class 3, class 2, and then 2 collective terms or 2 categories under the class 1. So instrument analyzer and software. So if you really want to get precise, I think it's CT, so collective term 943 and collective term 944 will fit within the scope of being required for UDI requirements. So again, I'm meant to reinforce that if it's a class 1 measuring or a class 1 device that's not supplied sterile, it's not mandatory for you to meet the UDI requirements, but as a manufacturer or sponsor, if you wish to do that, we certainly will support that happening. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Gary. I'm not sure if we can answer this one. GS1 is selling country-specific UDIs. Isn't this the whole purpose of a UDI to be unique worldwide?
Yeah, I couldn't speak on behalf of GS1 in relation to what defines as a country-specific UDI. If you had some examples, we're happy to sort of talk to GS1. There's not just the regulatory requirements around the UDI. So UDI itself is meant to support both the regulatory, the flow of the device through the healthcare system. So that's supply chain, point of care, clinical, as well as then through to all the things associated with patient information and records. So it is quite a complex code. And all I can say is there may be other supply chain considerations, but please take that up with GS1. But certainly from an Australian point of view, we are supportive of using UDI DI that is for devices supplied in other jurisdictions, in Europe and US. Then we'll look to support that. But there may be some other rules at GS1, but talk to them about that.
Great, thanks, Gary. Next question. This one's a long one. Including UDI in the essential principles makes it difficult for the manufacturer to sign off and on when it is the responsibility of the sponsor to ensure it is loaded in the system. Has the TGA considered this and looked at alternatives? So this
Yeah,
is about
thanks,
essentially.
Jasmine. Yeah, it is, and it certainly is something we've considered. And I think, as I mentioned at the start of us talking, there are some elements around the essential principles that we are looking to have UDI requirements in there, but where they fit and how they fit and the obligations on the manufacturer and sponsor is definitely something that we have been looking at and considering, and that will feed into the sort of final recommendations for government and regulatory drafting. So I couldn't say where we're landing at this point in time, but it's definitely a key factor in our considerations. So thank you.
Thanks, Gary. The next one I think I can answer, but Gary, feel free to jump in. We've got a request here to publish the draft UDI guidance document and draft AusUDID data dictionary on the TGA website. So we are currently, as we've mentioned, we're looking at all of the content on the UDI Hub on the TGA website, and those documents are certainly something that we're looking to include soon to allow people to be prepared and understand what's required. So yes, short answer, we are looking to publish more supporting information as soon as possible. All right, next question. What is the planned number of maximum uploads of the UDI records included in the Microsoft Excel spreadsheet upload for the bulk upload within AusUDID? So I can answer that one as well. Sorry, Gary, to steal your thunder. So currently, well, previously it was 100 records, but as Gary mentioned earlier, we have tested the functionality for up to 500 records. I'm unsure if that's live yet, but if it's not, it will be live in the not too distant future. So yeah, certainly looking around 500 records.
Yeah, just to add to that, Jasmine. So one of the considerations we've got now is with 500 records, it does create performance issues for the sponsor or the person submitting the data, as well as for us. So that's one of the things that we're working through at the moment to ensure that we don't create sort of technical issues for you, because certainly things time out. So we may be we were working with a sponsor to be able to say there are implications of that. So we may reduce that number down. So it is something that's sort of finalising, but certainly until the electronic interfaces are in place, we've had sponsors ask us to increase the number, and we're looking at how far we can take that without creating usability issues from your perspective. Because unfortunately, it's using Excel and embedding and using Excel within that environment does create some challenges from a technical perspective. So, but it will be more than 100.
Great, thanks for clarifying, Gary. How are we doing for time? All right, we've got time for some more questions. Next question, can you expand on the point you made about not requiring UDI on procedure packs and systems?
Yeah, Ken, what I might do, because this is one that there's probably a bit of a sort of a broader explanation. So what if you're okay, I might take that one on notice, and we'll actually issue a written response to that. Just to ensure we cover, there are some permutations and combinations associated with procedure packs loan kits. So ensure that we give some clarity. I'll take that on notice and provide a written update on that particular requirement.
Great. That one was listed by someone who posted anonymously. So if you are one of those people wanting that information, just email us through at udi@health.gov.au. And we'll also, as I said, be updating information on the hub as we're able to release it. So in the future, I'm sure we'll have more information on that for you. Next question, how will OTC devices be affected?
Yeah, thanks. So that sort of relates to the comment before and the considerations around retail-only devices. So we have been asked by sponsors to consider what other jurisdictions in Europe and US are doing around the requirements for the full UDI on retail-only devices. And so we have sort of documented that, done some research, and looked at putting a proposition together to get sponsor feedback. So if we're talking OTC means over the counter and retails exclusively, then we'll have that response together, and then we're looking to sort of seek for sponsor feedback on that. So that will go out to RegTech, to sponsors via the RegTech members. If you're some members of RegTech, if you are interested in registering you're interested in knowing more about that, then please email the support team.
So next question, will SIMDs, I'm assuming that's software in a medical device, be mandatory or optional, as this has not been required for US, EU, Saudi, China, Taiwan, or China,
Yeah. So again, if it fits in with those device classifications that I listed earlier, and it's regardless of whether software is a medical device or not, or software in a medical device, then that device will be required to supply UDI. And there are some provisions around, how the software is packaged and how it's reported. So again, there's some information that provide a bit more clarity around that, but certainly a device, software is a medical device or software in a medical device, if it fits in one of those broad classifications, then it will be required to meet the UDI requirements.
Great, wonderful. And just time for a couple more questions. I think we've covered this one already, but is TGA planning to accept medical device that comply with UDI requirements according to EU MDR 2017/745?
Yeah, there are some, I'll take that on notice and respond, because there's a bit more finer grained response to that. Particularly, there's things which, for example, European require around basic UDI, master UDI, DI, etc. So that won't apply here in Australia. So certainly where we're looking for a UDI matches the specifications for Europe, there are some other things that the European requirements which are unique to Europe. So it won't be something that we're asking for here in Australia. So I'll take that on notice, Jasmine.
No worries. Not sure if we can answer this one, but does the UDI need to match the medical device evidence? So for example, if the device is certified with the EU manufacturer evidence, does this require the EU UDI and the same for US, or it doesn't matter?
So as is at a high level, and again, this is what's happening from the EU in terms of manufacturer's evidence, but it's the device and the characteristics of the device. Okay, it's not just the UDI in terms of device identifier, it's the characteristics of the device that are encapsulated in the UDI database. We'll obviously need to match the characteristics of the device defined on the conformity assessment or the manufacturer's evidence that have been supplied by the manufacturer. So, that's all part of that certification process, but we may not have answered that question. I'd love to know more specifically about that, but happy to sort of send us an email or reach out to the team, and we can make sure that we give some clarity around that.
Great.
I think we've pretty well run out of time.
Yeah, we've run out of time. So if we haven't answered any of your questions today, please feel free to email udi@health.gov.au. My team will respond, will formulate a response and respond to you. Otherwise, we'll hand back, I think.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.